Dangerous Toys, Part 1. The captain could smell the rage from halfway across the ship, and it was approaching rapidly. He leaned back and waited, running through the recent reports from engineering. 2 requests for a meeting, but they had gone to the first officer, not to him directly. That may have been a mistake. Engineer O'Neill was fuming. Once was just a mistake, twice was a problem, but 3 times in a month was sabotage. On the other side of the ship, a dog's nose started to twitch in his sleep. She had tried to follow the chain of command, but the engineer had the right to speak to the captain directly if she felt the need. In general, the rule was first officer for the routine workings of the ship, and right to the top for any problems with his command. It might be her first ship, but she had tried to be nice, and that hadn't worked. By the time she reached the captain's quarters, he was ready and waiting. She knocked on the open door. "Captain, we need to talk." Captain Longnose sniffed. He wished his engineer had brought Loki with her. He looked quickly at his own puppy, Centofappy, as she slept on her blanket on his chair, what used to be his chair. "Engineer, I can tell you are upset. Please tell me how I can help." Patricia was ready to blow, and she ran straight to the problem. "Captain, I have already asked for 2 meetings. Someone is pissing about with engineering, and it's gone from stupid to dangerous. One of your crew had broken the human-altered seal on 3 systems in the last month. That means I have to recertify each one of those and also try to figure out if it was a deliberate attempt to damage the ship. Whatever else the effect on the captain, it created a scent that woke Centofappy instantly. With a yip, she bounced off the chair and ran to the captain, sniffing loudly, "Pack problem safe?" Patricia paused before she continued to allow her rage out. She had forgotten about the puppy. "Sorry, Centofappy human packmate, problem long-nose pack leader." The puppy sniffed and jumped up onto the captain's lap. Of course, his long nose was pack leader. He was the best person in the universe and gave both walkies and treats. The captain couldn't help but smile, regardless of the news. He petted his new friend, Centofappy go to Loki walkies later. With another yip, she leapt from the captain's lap and headed out the door to see her friend. The 2 of them waited. Once they knew the pup was out of hearing range, the captain did something rarely seen on this ship. He closed his door. "Engineer, why am I hearing about this now? If someone is endangering my ship, I expect to hear about it immediately." Patricia tried not to snarl. "Sir, I followed the regs. I told the first officer that the matter was important, and he seemed to take it seriously. Then I found out he was feeding me bullshit. He seems to forget that I have full access to security, and he didn't put any of the checks that I asked for into place. That was the first time. The second time was the same story, except I had secured engineering myself. This time, someone pried open the aft field generator and bypassed nearly all my checks. That means it's a senior crew member. Whoever did it tried to repair the seal, but human-altered stickers are far beyond tampering, and it alerted me the minute it was broken." The captain ran his senior crew through his mind. None of them seemed to be hostile. None of them had a grievance with the ship. Of course, the noisy ones could and did lie to each other, but to slip beneath his notice. That was beyond most of them. Most, but not all. "Engineer, take whatever action you need to right now. I will summon the first officer in private and discuss these events." He paused. "If you could just put together a report for me and inform security that you have my full authority to deal with this situation as you see fit. And Patricia, I do mean full authority. If you find a threat to my ship, you may take any actions you deem appropriate." He waited for her reaction. He could scent the change as some of those noxious human battle chemicals began filling his room. Humans don't take kindly to threats to the people and things they love. She nodded and left, leaving a trailing scent of threat, anger, worry, grim goodness behind her. If the first officer had any idea that there was a problem, he didn't show it when he arrived at the captain's quarters. "Sir? Is there a problem?" The captain took a deep sniff, ignoring the pointless words and his casual familiarity with the man. There, the creature was hiding something. Guilt, defiance, regret. He sat back, slightly shaken that he had allowed himself to be so blindsided. "Whippen, you have served this ship well. You have been a loyal and just officer since you came aboard all those years ago. How many thousands of light years have we traveled together and worked as a team? And yet here we are." He stopped, allowing his former first officer to let that sink in. Guilt does strange things to the mind. Hidden deeds done in the petty dark are seen clearly when the light appears. Whippen suddenly grasped the full extent to which he had allowed his issues to appear as treason to his captain and crew. "Sir—" The captain scented the man dissolve. His guilt was now beyond question, and he could even taste the strange road that has brought him to this ugly end. She upset you that much? You told me for months to bring aboard a human engineer, and now I find you are sabotaging my ship out of some hidden spite? That got a reaction. The guilty hate being accused of crimes they hadn't committed. Sir, yes, I ignored the engineer and her silly complaints. So someone tore her precious stickers. She treats the whole ship like some personal project. And that creature of hers? On those last words, he managed to shut up. Even as they came out of his mouth, he knew that his time on this ship was over. Some things can't be forgiven, and he knew the captain well enough. He tried to scrape his dignity together. Sir, I regret that I can no longer serve aboard the dangerous toys. I hereby give you my resignation. The captain rose from his chair. No. You will remain under my command until I am convinced that you are not part of some criminal conspiracy against this ship. 3 systems attacked and you hide that from me? Because you don't like dogs. If I find your involvement goes deeper than rank stupidity, I will ensure you never travel in a ship again, let alone serve on one. You will confine yourself to quarters and write a full report on your actions. I will inform the crew that you are no longer at liberty and why. Dismissed. He hesitated. Whippen, I hope dearly that you haven't allowed anything to happen here that will cost us all. You know the crew. If there is a traitor here, I hope you will put that misguided mind of yours to work on it. The former first officer straightened up. Of course, sir. Anything I can do to help. The captain watched him leave, the scent of despair mixing with the fading echoes of his engineer's anger. He shook his head. He would be reading that story in the air for days to come. There were suddenly many things to be done in person, so he began a slow walk to the bridge, and this time he paid close attention to what the ship had to tell him. Word travels fast on a ship, even one as large as the dangerous toys. The angry human, the closed door, and the summoning of the first officer had gone ahead of the captain, leaving him many trails to follow. When he arrived at the bridge, he nodded to the very obviously disturbed crew. He sat in his command seat and put himself on ship-wide comms. This is the captain. The first officer has resigned and will remain in his quarters until we make landfall. He is to be apprehended if found anywhere else. That caused a ripple of shock. Crew came and went, even in a happy ship like the one they felt this was. Confinement under arms was unheard of. The captain continued. The human engineer is currently designated second in command until informed otherwise. Someone on our ship has attacked 3 sealed ship systems, and I won't permit any further attacks. The off-duty crew will remain in their cabins or in the canteen until further notice. I expect all officers and crew to remain vigilant and provide any information they may have on these events. All senior officers are required to attend an immediate briefing with the exception of Engineer O'Neill and any officers that she designates. Aware of the dark tone, he decided to add a little more. Men, I hold the responsibility for our lives out here. I will not permit a risk like this to continue. If you were foolish enough to tamper with the human seals and are willing to come forward, you will lose a week's wages and nothing more. If this is something darker, then I ask you to think hard about what you have heard. Patricia heard the news of her unwelcome promotion at the same time as everyone else. So that was what the captain had meant by full authority. Still, she was surprised with the speed of the captain's reaction. It can't have just been the first officer, or she would be back at work by now. The captain was telling her that he had been a minor part of the problem, or at least he wasn't sure. She made a command decision and went to fetch Loki. If she was suddenly a target, then these Xenos could find out the other reason humans kept dogs. Dangerous Toys, Part 2. Patricia was only slightly surprised to find a security guard standing at her door. He was busy playing with Cento Fappi, who was happily chasing the guard's tail. The man looked up with a guilty flinch. Sorry, sir, the boss sent me down to check that Loki was secure, and then this little bundle turned up. I'm afraid I couldn't let Loki out without you here. She smiled as the scaly, scary, and no doubt battle-hardened creature began scratching behind the dog's ears. That's not a problem. Perhaps you could take her to the captain. I'm sure he'll be happy to see her. I'm taking Loki for a walk anyway. The guard perked up. It was rare that he got to take these odd creatures for what the humans called walkies, but he found it immensely satisfying. With pleasure, engineer. You'd better let my boss know where you're going, or he will feel left out. Patricia nodded. Don't worry, that's where I'm going first. I just wanted to take Loki with me. Something in her tone struck the security guard, and his professional instincts made him stop. Sir? She shook her head. Nothing important. I'll meet security and then begin a tour of the systems. If someone is messing about, I'll get to the bottom of it. Probably just someone being a little too curious. I won't be going anywhere that Loki can't follow." She opened her door to a very unhappy Loki, his whining having been ignored when he could clearly hear the puppy playing outside. If she could have planned a worse torture, she couldn't think of one. Happily, Loki didn't carry grudges once she let him out and let the flurry of nose, woofs, and licks take place. Once both dogs had established that all was well with the world, she spoke Loki-Walkie's guard no games, and then she turned to the puppy, sent Fappy-Walkies to Captain Guard. She couldn't imagine anyone would attack the captain's dog, but certain instincts needed to be trained, and now was as good a place to start as any. Loki had been trained long before he had ever seen a ship. The guard half understood what was being said, but he got a genuine shock when Loki suddenly stopped playing and went quiet. His nose began sniffing, and he took his place to the left of the engineer. Something suddenly reminded him that they were predators and that humans had had them for a very long time. Fappy yipped a bit until a glare from Loki silenced her, and she copied his position beside the guard. Patrika nodded to him and left, Loki matching her pace as he kept his position. She began her inspections on the way to security. She hadn't been on board for long enough to deal with much more than half the main systems, but she had a bloody good idea of what the rest of them were supposed to look like. She pulled panels while Loki kept a lookout. No one was going to creep up on her while he was there, no matter how deep in the tech she was. She hit the first issue with the comms panel. Someone had hardwired a parallel system independently onto the node. It wasn't good work, but it was enough, and it was old enough to be from before the ship left the dockyard. She knew it wasn't on the designs or her engineering notes. Maybe something for the captain? She doubted it. She decided the easiest way to find out was to disable it and wait for someone to start complaining, so she pulled the whole thing and packed it with her toolkit. On to the next. 2 crew members were rudely interrupted when their conversation about what to do about the captain and his bloody engineer was suddenly cut off. The next panel that was just plain odd was the lighting. Who needed to mess with lighting? Any crew could hit the switch, and they didn't even turn on unless the ship knew someone was about to arrive. It was such an old system, so seamless that most people thought the ship was constantly bright. Again, someone had added another independent line. At best, they could override the controls and turn the ship dark. Another backup? She shook her head. This was another one off the book, so she was halfway through tearing it out when Loki let out a quiet growl. She didn't need a translator for that one. It had been built into humans and dogs for 30,000 years. She picked up her plasma lance, just an engineer holding a tool and not, for example, a weapon that could punch through armor and anyone wearing it. One of the crew was busy opening the comms panel she had altered. He had apparently not seen the engineer or Loki in the alcove that held the lighting systems. Before she had time to think, she called out, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The crewman jumped and turned to see the human. He was torn between ending this problem for good or running. Then he snarled. Humans were soft, and she hadn't found anything important yet. Better to end this now. He drew a knife and began to run at her. Loki didn't know the why or the who, but he knew that something was attacking his pack. If the captain had been there, he could have read the story as something like threat attack or guard attack. As Loki began. To Patrika, it was almost slow motion as Loki went from a standing start when he saw the blade to his full speed. From start to finish, it was only a matter of seconds before Loki had reached the attacker and hurled himself on the limb that held the weapon, his head biting and shaking the arm with enough force to break it several times over. The crewman was thrown to the ground, and Loki's legs spread, braced against the decking as he continued to bite deeper. Patrika turned on the plasma lance and ran to Loki as the screams began to fill the hallway. "Enough, Loki, good boy, best boy guard." Loki sniffed at the high praise and stood back, waiting to see if he could do more. The crewman was a mess. Loki's claws had raked his face on the way to the ground, and his arm was broken in several places. He thought it couldn't get worse until the human held a plasma torch close enough to his wounds to cut off the leakage. He hissed in pain. The human spoke in that odd accent. "Well, I was on my way to security anyway. I hope you don't mind answering a few questions. Incidentally, if you move, I will let Loki tear your throat out and eat whatever is left. Are we clear?" Her prisoner simply whimpered since Loki was keeping himself and a surprising number of teeth firmly in view and growling a warning. Patrika pulled her comms and called the captain. He should hear this first was a useful rule of thumb. "Captain, I have someone here that thought it would be a good idea to attack me while Loki was watching. He's going to need a med bay and someone needs to ask him a few questions. I'm at the comms panel on Deck C." The captain had been fervently hoping that this was all a mistake, and that he could return his ship to its normal, happy self. The smells on the bridge were of concern, doubt, and even a little fear. He had issued extra rations to the canteen as his crew gathered to murmur about what was happening. No doubt they would create their own version of events. When his comms lit up, he was hoping the engineer had some good news. Instead, he was faced with the worst. He assured Patricia that they were on the way, although she hadn't sounded worried. After he called his security chief and raced to join them, it occurred to him that the engineer should have been worried. She weighed less than he did. She was unarmed, and if he was to be honest, nobody's idea of a soldier. What had she done? The first smell was of Loki triumphant, then the battle chemicals of his human, then the blood. He slowed down, trying to endure the assault to his senses. He could see Patricia standing over her fallen attacker holding a plasma lance while Loki was locked in place and growling. The scents were mixed: threat, warning, surprise, anger, attack, pain, blood, regret, fear. The event played out as he tasted it from the beginning. Patricia was glad to see the cavalry arrive as the captain and his security guards came down the corridor. She guessed that they hadn't seen the little puppy determinedly following the captain on her tiny legs. She told Loki, "Sento Fappy Puppy Protect." Loki sniffed and decided that his pack was safe for now and went to intercept and explain to his friend. With a last growl and a yawn that displayed all his teeth, he ran to meet her. The captain saw Loki's ears perk up as the engineer said something, and then the dog turned towards him and began to run. He could see blood on the thin sides of its face as it raced down the corridor. He could smell his own surprise and fear jolted by some primitive instinct as Loki went past him and woofed a welcome brave puppy at the little Sento Fappy that had apparently followed him down. The two of them went into a circle of tail wagging and sniffing as Loki explained, "Loki brave attack pack Sharpclaw," he huffed in pride. "Loki good boy, best boy." Dangerous Toys, Part 3. Patricia watched as the captain sniffed around the incapacitated crewman that had attacked her. Her plasma lance had been replaced by the security guard's plasma rifle pointed directly at the man's face. Medbay staff were on their way to install him in a nice, comfortable room with a heavy lock. She figured this was now someone else's mess and went back to rebuilding the lighting panel. The captain had been clear that her next move was a conference with himself and the chief of security, so she whistled for Loki. The security team swung around at the high-pitched sound from the human, automatically raising their weapons while the captain looked up with astonishment. It appeared that the Xenos around here didn't know humans could whistle. Only Loki reacted as if it was normal, chuffing at Sento Fappy to follow and running back to his companion. Still delighted with all the recent praise, he ran quickly, and the captain got to see those long legs hurl Loki down the corridor in seconds. It gave him a much clearer idea of how the attack had happened. He nodded to himself. Whistle codes made sense for a hunting animal, much more useful than shouting out in large spaces. He guessed it had become a habit since this was hardly such a place. Alas, his species had never developed such skills. Perhaps there was a device he could use. Questions for another day. Engineer, you never cease to amaze me. I will meet you at security once I'm done here. Please go there directly. He nodded to one of the guards. If you would accompany her? I think Loki has had enough excitement today. The chief of security was a deeply unhappy man. His ship had run like a dream until the human had kicked over a rock he had never even suspected existed. It made him feel foolish and unprofessional. In order to try and regain some self-respect, he was running every test that he could think of on his systems and checking over every crew member's background. So far, he had found nothing. Normally, that would have cheered him up, but now that meant that obviously someone out there was better at this than he was. He fought the gloom that was descending and started again. The engineer packed her evidence and began the short trip to the security office. Loki was skipping ahead and scouting, his nose poking into everything. Sento Fappy was excitedly doing the same, faithfully copying his actions. Patricia smiled at the sight, knowing that one day that puppy would have a nose that equaled or surpassed Loki's. The captain was a lucky man. She listened in on the conversation between them. People smell old many searching new smell. Dutifully, the puppy sniffed around. Old not good? Loki sniffed, guarding new smell's good warning. They continued to check ahead as the guard and the engineer watched with amusement. The medics bound the offender's arms as he lay quietly on the ground. Satisfied, the captain moved with one of his security team to meet with the engineer, leaving one to get the prisoner into custody. He was still at a complete loss as to what was happening on his ship, and the criminal was unhelpfully completely unknown to him. All he could scent was the blood and the pain, with some small suggestion that he came from the cargo hold. After they left, the medics carefully loaded the man onto a stretcher and sprayed the air. The remaining guard sniffed. "What's that?" The medic grinned. "That's our alibi." He stepped out of the way just in time for the guard to see that the other medic was holding a gun. The accomplice swiftly shot the guard in the face. The prisoner quickly climbed off the stretcher and put on a medical coat handed to him by his accomplice. "Thanks, that bloody animal was a nightmare. Who allows something like that on a ship?" The guard had crumpled to the ground, and the two medics lifted the body onto the stretcher and began wheeling it away. The compound sprayed by the assassins began dissolving away any and all scent traces in the corridor. It left a nice pine-like smell instead, one that would tell the captain exactly nothing. The engineer was laying out the dubious equipment she had uncovered, waiting for the captain to arrive. The chief of security was unfamiliar to her and seemed to have little interest in conversation right now. The dogs had stationed themselves at the door, making sure that they would be undisturbed. Seeing Centifapi trying to imitate Loki's stance was adorable. She glanced around the office, obviously home to many passing shifts and littered with personal items. Odd flags, coats, and the debris of long hours sitting in front of screens. The equipment looked old and unloved. She silently pushed it higher up her things-to-do list. The ship seemed to have such an unexciting and stable trade route that she hadn't spent much time thinking about it. The captain arrived, leaving the security guard outside to amuse the dogs. He could scent the suppressed panic from his security chief and the breakdown of the human battle drugs. His engineer seemed to have recovered remarkably easily from what could only be regarded as attempted murder. She seemed absorbed in the bits and pieces of tech lying in front of her. "Engineer, I hope you are well. I cannot fathom how such a thing has happened on my ship. Never had we had violence against a ship's officer. Please forgive me for such a failing." Even as he said it, it occurred to him that she was entitled to break her contract without penalty. She had been promised a safe working environment, and no one would quibble if she decided a knife-wielding lunatic qualified as a reason to leave. Patricia looked up, still absorbed in the technology. "Oh, that. It's fine, Captain. I have Loki if I feel worried. This is more interesting." She held up the first part. "Captain, I don't recall exactly when you took command here, but this stuff is older than me. This ship seems to have a parallel system running through at least some of the systems. I'll need to go back over the work I did earlier since I may have just chucked this stuff into recycling. It could have been linked somewhere and I wouldn't necessarily have noticed." The captain was just happy that he didn't seem to be losing his human and her dog anytime soon. "Patricia, if you don't mind, can you explain to us why that is important? There are many redundancies in our systems." The chief of security dragged himself away from his screen and paid attention. Even he could take the hint about witches the captain meant. She nodded. "Okay, say you have some dark plan and you're building ships. Say you want to do things that should perhaps stay hidden. Well, why not wire up a few ships with a separate system?" She paused for a minute. "Call it a parasite system. It can just sit there for years. It doesn't interfere with anything unless that ship is doing something or heading somewhere of interest. Then you put your people on board and you have the perfect cover. This is pure speculation. Right up to the bit where a crewman attacks me with a knife. Why do that if you are going to be caught standing over a body? Unless you're pretty sure you won't be found, and probably neither will the body." She turned to the security chief. "I'm sure you have cams on that corridor. Can you show us the attack?" The chief hit a few buttons and the main screen lit up. The cam followed Patricia as she dismantled the comms panel, and they watched as she pulled out the unwanted additions. Then it followed her to the lighting alcove. It watched as Loki sat on guard, then the alarm as he warned the engineer. They saw Loki bound away at speed towards the attacker, still unseen on the recording. Then Patricia igniting the plasma lance and moving towards the event. At no time was the assailant visible. Patricia held up her hand. "Okay, stop it there. I know how this system is supposed to work, and there is no way that the cams should have ignored the attack. Someone or something kept it off your systems. So now we have another problem." The sheer scale of the human's suggestion, the logic of it, hit the captain hard. I am being used as some kind of puppet? This ship, my ship, is being run by some cabal for their own purposes? Do you think I am shipping murderers about the galaxy like some kind of gullible fool? Patricia held up her hands. No, Captain. I imagine that it would be very rare to actually use one of these ships. On Earth, we had such a thing as a Q-ship. A military ship disguised as a civilian vessel in times of war. Would it be such a stretch to start building that into your ships just in case? Or perhaps such a system could be discovered and used by criminals? I have no idea. Your people are a complete unknown to mine. I have no idea if such things are allowed. I can tell you that any ship's engineer worth the name must have known about it. Neither of them was prepared for the blistering explosion from the chief of security. He immediately began ripping the panels from his console, swearing in a variety of languages. Patricia raised her eyebrows at the captain. "Sir, it might be better if I looked after the systems.